Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Sinigang Valley Harvard Business School Foxmont Capital Partners event. We are very honored today to have assembled a broad array of participants from the whole ecosystem of the Silicon Valley. We have mentors, we have incubators, we have investors, and we also have technology-savvy entrepreneurs who have succeeded in rapidly growing their business despite the crippling pandemic. I'd like to think that probably in this event, we will produce our first batch of unicorns from the Philippines. Towards the middle of this event, we will be also joined by a special guest from Indonesia by the name of Nadiem Makarin, who is the founder of Gojek out of Indonesia, and which was one of the first unicorns in Southeast Asia. Gojek has recently announced a merger with Tokopedia, the largest e-commerce marketplace in Indonesia, and are looking to list at a public market valuation of $40 billion. So we are very honored to have Nadiem Makarin as part of the panel towards the middle of the event. The event will be a panel discussion among and there will be no individual speaker presentations, but rather it will be a panel discussion, which will be for 1 hour, followed by 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A. Now, let me introduce the moderator for this event, Franco Varona. Franco is the managing director of Foxmont Capital Partners, which is the only local and independent venture capital firm in the Philippines. It's independent of any support from conglomerates. Foxmont Capital Partners has been focused really in providing early stage financing to businesses or technology-enabled businesses that provide solutions for the Filipinos. The fund has made over 15 investments over the past 2 years and is now in the process of raising more capital because of there's so much in response to a much higher level of deal activity. Just for everyone to know, the venture capital space in the Philippines has been nascent, but to date, after 2 years, almost close to $200 million has been raised. Towards the end of this session, there will be an announcement by Franco with respect to a Foxmont Day for any participant here that want to learn more about the fund and that might want to participate in a fast-growing sector. Franco has been a technology entrepreneur. He served as the founding general manager of Grab in the Philippines. Under his leadership, Grab Philippines became the operating model which other Grab units around Southeast Asia have emulated and followed. Franco also founded, directed, and advised several businesses, including Global Media Post and Vintage Grail. I now turn over the floor to Franco, who will introduce our esteemed roster of panelists. Thank you.
Thanks, Danny, for the kind introduction. And thanks to everybody here for inviting us, all of us, to speak today. So hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Franco Varona, and I am the managing partner of Foxmont Capital Partners. And as Danny said, the Philippines' only independent venture capital firm. We invest in great Filipino startups with great founders, much like many of our panelists in today's session. Perhaps one of the most rewarding parts of running an early stage tech-focused venture capital firm in the Philippines is that we at Foxmont really do have a front seat to the rapidly emerging startup ecosystem. What we've learned as Foxmont is that Sinigang Valley is more than just a physical street in Poblacion. The term really does encompass more about the ecosystem as a whole, about the ethos of collaboration and working together to uplift all through technology. We have an amazing panel of speakers here today, including Nadiem Makarin, HBS 2011 alum, founder of Gojek and current Minister of Education, Culture, Research, and Technology of Indonesia. Hopefully we can all learn from his insights from the Indonesian ecosystem. Nadiem is actually currently just finishing up a meeting with the Indonesian Parliament at the moment, and will be joining us at around 4:30, so please do stick around for that. But here right now are other Harvard alum, including Jesse Maxwell, CEO of Magsaysay Shipping and Logistics, and my partner at Foxmont Capital. Manny Ayala, Managing Director of Endeavor Philippines, who's calling in from California right now. Paulo Campos, co-founder and Managing Director of Zalora Philippines, is with us as well. As a side note, a little Easter egg, there was a brief time in history when Nadiem, Jesse, and Paulo all shared the hallowed halls of Harvard together. These Harvard alum will give us a summary of how they've seen the Philippine ecosystem grow from their own unique perspectives. Also with us, and will join us later on the panel, are founders of some of the Philippines' fastest growing and most visible startups today, and might I add, Foxmont portfolio companies. We have Roland of Kumu, a live streaming app and a star in the international investment community. Robertz of Locad, a logistics enabler who represents one of Sequoia Capital's first investments in the country. And Aldrich of NextPay, a fintech app who represents one of Golden Gate Ventures' first investments in the country. And I think collectively, those three, they can guide us through the ecosystem today. So after the panel discussions, roughly at around 5:20, I will open it up for a short Q&A session for any of the panelists. Hopefully Nadiem will be able to stick with us through then as well. Feel free to write any of the questions that you have in the chat box below. I think you might see a Q&A box. Go ahead and write it there and I'll pass them on to the panelists as I see them. So without further ado, let me introduce our first panelist, my partner, Jesse. Hey, Jess.
Franco, how are you?
Doing pretty well. Long time no see, I think, like 15 minutes. Listen, Jess, I think it's really interesting, and I wanted to just kind of get your sense. You know, you have been quite forward thinking in your own personal investments over the years, of course, including being Grab Philippines' first investor, and therefore bringing one of the region's fastest growing startups to the Philippines in 2013. In fact, I think what a lot of people don't know is that the Philippines was actually one of Grab's first international markets outside of Malaysia. Can you walk us through that decision to invest? I mean, was it something that you imagined could have changed the way that Filipinos commute such a short 8 years later?
Thanks, Franco. Yeah, it is really amazing how much Grab has grown in the course of, I guess, 8-9 years now, and we've had the privilege and I'd say honor of being part of it from the very beginning in the Philippines. The Philippines was, I believe, the second market after Malaysia, so things were still very, very new and early, and a lot of trial and error going on and testing. But I mean, I think just from my decision as an investor, I mean, it was a project that actually we had spent a lot of time thinking about and discussing while we were at HBS. In fact, Anthony had started it while we were at HBS. Nadiem had started Gojek also. So this was a topic of conversation, a lot of energy around it. And it was post HBS execution. And when Anthony wanted to move to the Philippines, I was all for it and told him I would help and support and get involved. I love the concept of a startup like Grab and Gojek, where it's really trying to solve a problem, and you can get really passionate around trying to solve these inefficiencies and create value for both drivers and consumers alike. So yeah, it was a no-brainer for me, and it was a really interesting ride. Figuring out how to make it work. What's amazing is how it's developed over the years and how they've sort of diversified and now trying to become super app, which is really, in that sense, they've only really just scratched the surface of the opportunities that lie ahead. What I didn't expect was actually how much effort and financial resources it would take Grab to actually move into these markets and achieve like a big scale that they have now. I mean, the financial resources to really work slowly to change consumer behaviors, to change the status quo dynamics of an industry. So it really speaks to how important it is for a startup to have like a long-term, clear, big vision, but also a kind of flexible vision. And definitely how important it is to successfully raise funds to sustain, your mission and your efforts over a long period of time. Things that Anthony and Grab and others have been super successful at.
I think it's it's funny because I remember a conversation you and I had in like 2013, 2014, and we looked at each other and we looked at Grab and we said, do you really think this thing's going to be worth $100 million? And and I guess the answer to that is a resounding yes. And I guess a lot of that has to do with the fact that you almost have to be very flexible with the business and grow where the need is. I mean, let's be honest. Did you think that it was going to grow beyond a taxi app, right? A taxi booking app? Was that something that anybody ever imagined it would be?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't in the cards for the first couple of years at least. So it just, with the whole digital ecosystem changing, and once you have an audience, a market, it only makes sense to just continue to serve it with more and more services and products. But yeah, so who knows where it's going to be in the next 5 years, but a lot of things can happen.
Yeah, I agree. And within your own investment journey, I mean, what do you think have been the trends in the ecosystem recently? I mean, let's put it this way. What was cool back then in 2011 when you got back from HBS? What was kind of interesting? And today, how does that compare to what actually we see, you and I, at Foxmont today?
I think, when during that time, 2012, the hot new startups were like basically standalone websites doing like Groupon style group buying. There were a lot of that coming up. Of course, Zalora and Paulo, Campos, that whole e-commerce thing was just starting, so super small, and that took quite some time to scale up. But yeah, so that was sort of like the stage where not that much was going on. I think a lot of things were happening in silos, and of course, I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of access to local VC funding. There were hardly any at the time. Regional interest in the Philippines was super low. So fast forward to now, and you've got talent that is more and more available. We've seen a lot of interest from Filipinos living abroad wanting to come back and be part of this Philippine story and be founders or join companies. I think the success stories we're seeing are encouraging more and more people to do that. We've also had the luxury of time now, where fast forward to now, you've got people who've been in companies like Grab, Zalora, and other startups that have matured and now bring their experience and expertise and bring that to new companies, new projects, new startups. So talent is not so much an issue anymore, which is great. You've also got, let's see, I think in general, like more appetite and interest in risk taking from both Filipinos here, but also local investors and conglomerates who are willing to like be part of this and invest in it. They kind of see the potential and want to be a part of it. And one other thing I wanted to touch on is I think back then, the attractiveness of the local market based on its size was actually not that great or not that attractive, especially to foreign investors. We did have 100 million people, but it was actually very hard to start a business that could be relevant to that many people, given the poverty rates and the infrastructure of our tech infrastructure. Internet was so slow, for example. Today, with the digital revolution underway and then recently turbocharged by the pandemic, everyone's now using a smartphone for just about everything: social networking, commerce, and there are all these tech platforms that are being used by just about everybody. So almost our whole population now is truly an addressable market for many new startups, whereas before maybe it was like 5-10% of the population. So consumer behavior has been forever changed, and it's opening up a whole new plethora of opportunities. And I think the barriers to entry have also come down, because instead of starting your own ecosystem, you can actually piggyback on all these different platforms and have thriving startups that actually just are part of the ecosystem that latch on it and you don't really have to invest tons of money just to create your own platform anymore. So the whole platform play is becoming really more relevant in the country, and basically just serving these ecosystems, e-commerce, ride hailing, food delivery. There's so many new startups that we're seeing that are being part of it, whether it's an e-commerce enabler, a cloud kitchen on delivery platforms, live streaming, digital payments. So there's tons of new opportunities, and these opportunities, these startups can actually be really big in their own right, even though they're existing within the platforms. So I think all those things are coming together at this time, and a lot of new investor interest. A lot of the opportunities are now being pursued. So I do also believe that the next few years are going to be super exciting, and I'm just waiting for unicorn status in the Philippines to become a more common thing.
Yeah, I feel like it's not going to be that long. That's my honest opinion of unicorn statuses in the Philippines. But thanks, Jess. And I think you had mentioned Pao, and perfect. We've got Pao on the panel as well. And of course, Pao has got some unique perspectives as an operator within the startup ecosystem for, I think you told me earlier offline that it's been 10 years now since you started Zalora in the Philippines.
Yeah, that's right, Franco. First of all, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be among fellow HBSers, and it feels like a worlds collide moment for me as we have HBS, Jesse, Nadiem, and I, as Jesse mentioned, we're at HBS together. We have Sinigang Valley, of which I'm very proud to, together with the Kumu team, Roland and the Kumu team, and then Franco, Jesse, Mark, and the Foxmont team to be one of the founding board members of the Sinigang Valley Association, and Foxmont as well. I'm an incoming LP in Foxmont as well. So somehow all worlds collide for me me this afternoon. Thanks so much, Franco, and for the question. And just continue where Jesse left off. I think it's 10 years ago, the landscape on the digital front was very different from what we have today. After all, having lived through the pandemic, somehow we take it as given that this whole digital opportunity has been clear before us. But 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. I left a very comfortable job at BCG in Singapore. Shout out to Anthony Anjan, I think he's also out there in the audience. To start an e-commerce company, people thought I was crazy. They're like, "Wyatt, you're going to start an e-commerce company in the Philippines?" And I think that speaks to two things. One is that the digital opportunity was really just emerging then, and you had literally tens of millions of Filipinos who didn't have basic access at the time relative to those that do now. And in general, the thought of also going, starting a startup and being on the startup scene in the Philippines was also a bit not so common in that sense. And, I think we tend to generally pursue the corporate world, and I think those two trends are somehow have been changing. And through the course of the last 10 years at Zalora, I think all of the trends that Jesse mentioned around increased adoption, increased investor interest. At Zalora, we're very happy to welcome the Ayala Group as our strategic investor about 5 years ago now. And the point about conglomerates also being interested in the digital scene and startups has also been very relevant. And it's and of course, if the pandemic in particular has really accelerated a lot of those trends we were already seeing beforehand, and in a way compressed much of the digital adoption behavior into what has really been a tremendous change in customer behavior that we're all living through, of course, today.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I think back in 2011, when I heard about Zalora coming in, of course, when I heard about the people that were starting it, including yourself and of course, Brian Koo, I was like, those guys are crazy. But of course, today, obviously you look like you have amazing foresight, and we would love to continue to work with you with the businesses that you introduced to the ecosystem. But there's something that's really interesting, Pao, and back then, 2011, 2012, 2013, when I started with Grab, it felt as though the startup ecosystem itself was pretty quiet, right? I mean, there was like a very small group of people. I think there's a Facebook page, Startup PH. It probably only had like 30 people on it back then. Today, I did a quick check, and I think that total is now 45,000 people on that chat. It felt like a few founders with great ideas, but today it seems and it feels incredibly different. Foxmont itself, we meet maybe 5 or 10 new founders and startups every week. What do you think has changed over all this time? Why are we getting all these new startups, all these new founders?
No, I think it's a great question, Franco, and I think it's a very exciting time for the Philippines. And from that perspective, I think one of your perspectives on the Foxmont side that I tend to agree with very much is we are at the stage where Indonesia was, I would say, 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago, in having a confluence of different factors coming together in a very synergistic way. You have venture capital interest and people looking to outside of Indonesia now and looking at Southeast Asia and seeing the opportunity, seeing Philippines as somehow the next big thing, and just being on the front lines. I can really see that the investor interest in the Philippines, in fact, has even increased throughout the pandemic. Second is the talent point that you made, and I think almost more importantly, this culture of being a founder is something that we're now seeing increasingly built off of the success, I think, of many of the initial big tech companies out there, the Grabs of the world. Very happy that Constantin, you'll be hearing from Constantin later. He's my right-hand man at Zalora for many years, and now off on his own with Locad and doing extremely well. And then finally, the sea turtle profiles, as we call them, as you mentioned. So our Filipino brethren and diaspora abroad looking to come home to the Philippines. And here I'll highlight the efforts of Roland, Rexy, and the Kumu team for really flying that flag for PhilAms to come home to the Philippines and help us in what I really think, and this is something I've become very passionate about throughout the pandemic. The Philippines is in a very bad spot. We all feel it as business leaders. We all see it in terms of the contraction of the economy. It's somehow really incumbent on us to help in that process of creative destruction, in creating the new ventures of tomorrow, leveraging the fact that consumer behavior has been altered so much because of the impact of the pandemic on us. And I think we really are in the middle of a golden age of Philippine startups. And if you see how that developed in Indonesia, where even most recently they had 100 times more venture capital than the Philippines, if we're even able to approximate those types of levels of investment in the local scene, I think we'll really be entering this very golden age of Philippine startups. And something for all of us to look forward to, Franco.
I think you're right. Just to make a point there, I always compare the Philippines 2021 to Indonesia 2011. When people ask me how far behind are we, et cetera, I always actually say that it's 2011 Indonesia that we should compare ourselves to. And if you look at it, actually, the amount of investments that were going into Indonesia at that point was actually still quite small as well, right? And really was sustained by country-focused funds, East Ventures, Kajora, Alpha JWC. And really only then did those massive amounts of foreign investments, as you referred to, start coming in and start spurring the ecosystem. And of course, that then kind of completes the ecosystem because more money, more founders, more startups, more unicorns, more paths to exit, and you kind of have this full and complete circle. That said, I also don't think that it's going to take us that long to get to find our first unicorns. And our first kind of extremely large grassroots homegrown startups. In fact, there may be some on our panel today. But with that said, I did want to ask. We did speak a little bit about entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship as a path to, let's say, self-sustainability in the Philippines, something that's quite new in this country, I would say. Perhaps not too much for our your fellow HBS grads. However, just in the larger, Philippine diaspora, of course, entrepreneurship is quite a new concept. But I did want to move over to Manny for a second, of course, who runs Endeavor Philippines, one of the large entrepreneur networks. And of course, he has a unique perspective on entrepreneurs in the Philippines. So, hey, Manny.
Hey,
thanks
very
for
much for having me. Yep. Thanks for letting me crash your party. And thank you, HBS Club. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I know it's at 1:30 in the morning where you are. So, thank you for staying up so late and joining us. Manny, really quickly, I did want to ask about your perspective, right? Can you give us a sense of the volume and even the quality of entrepreneurs that you've seen come through your office over the years? As
Sure.
the head of
So
Endeavor
yeah,
Philippines?
so we've been at this for 6.5 years now, but we started the office in 2015 in January. And today we have 28 entrepreneurs that we support, right? So our job is to help them scale up. 28 entrepreneurs from 23 companies. With respect to quality, I think the quality bar has always been the same, right? For Endeavor, it's, we're looking for what we call high impact entrepreneurs, right? Which means three things. So first, you're high impact if you're an entrepreneur with the best ideas and the ability to execute. Second, you're high impact when you actually scale up your business to create two things we really care about deeply at Endeavor as a nonprofit, right? That you go on to scale and create jobs, and that you go on to scale and create lots of revenues, which then have a trickle down effect in the economy. Third, and I think the most interesting thing about what it means to be high impact is, as an entrepreneur, you pay it forward, right? When you become successful, you reinvest that success in the next generation by mentoring others, by sharing your network with others, in many cases by investing money in others, right? It's that cycle that I think you were referring to earlier, right?
Yeah.
You get this density of activities because of these people who pay it forward, right? The other thing about quality is we're looking for entrepreneurs that are generating, $3 to $5 million a year when we bring them to our sort of global Shark Tank, growing at 80 to 100% a year, right? And two observations about, kind of what the story arc looks like, right, over these 6.5 years. So the first part of the story arc is, out of the first 5 entrepreneurs in Endeavor, only one was tech, right? So if you look at the first 5, interestingly, you have, Nick's at Surpass was the first, followed by an outsourcing company, Bose Coffee, Kenneth Gobonpuez's company, and then Adobo Connection, right? So interestingly, 2015, 2016, it was still largely brick and mortar. 2017, you really began to see the shift towards more kind of made, for and by tech, right? And, just rattling off these names, M-Clinica, Ayala, Lendo, Fly Spaces, Coins.ph, Storm. Then we had a couple of brick and mortar, Lay Bear, Zark's Burgers, and then our first hardware company, Yoo-Hoo Air. I don't know if you know Yoo-Hoo and Dustin.
Yeah, we do know them. Yeah.
Sprout with Patrick and Alex, Sprout Solutions, and then First Circle, Acudine, Mineski, which is esports, and then Abet Valenzuela with Equilife, which is critical care equipment and services. Then you had Caliber, Quickwire, and of course today one of our guests tonight, Kumu, the folks at Kumu. The second sort of story arc that I observed is, and you guys kind of alluded to this as well, you see the early guys, you see a bunch of, many of them are expats, right? So you start with expat. Then you start to get the repats, or what Paulo calls the sea turtles, right? So folks that studied overseas, or that, that were sort of born and bred overseas, coming over to build companies. What you're beginning to see more and more of at the early stage, right? So expat, repat, and to use Tagalog, dapat, right? So the expat, the repats, and the dapats. And I think that's really cool, right? And all together, right, it's making for a very interesting ecosystem.
That's very true, actually. What about this concept of entrepreneurship as a path to self-sustainability, as a way to basically, success, actually? I mean, I always feel, and maybe this is just my own, theory, that this is something that is changing inherently in Filipinos, that they are starting to not just join large brands, large FMCGs, let's say, but actually are looking at, startups, tech-enabled businesses, founding their own businesses as a way to actually succeed in a challenging market like the Philippines. What do you think about
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the drivers of growth in any ecosystem is inspirational stories, right? So the more inspirational stories you have, the more tempted people in great jobs are to leave them and to start their own, right? They have to be able to explain to their parents who, paid for four years of college, I'm doing something, it's going to be successful. And look, so-and-so did this, so-and-so did that. Roland and Rexy started Kumu and they're just killing it, right? And They're completely disrupting, a huge industry. So I do think the tide is shifting, right? You're seeing more and more people coming out of multinationals, coming home from the US, building companies. To me, that's exciting. Now, I think some of the reason people have the courage to do that is they look at capital, right? And if you were to ask me, what 2015, when will we get to a point where we're raising or we're seeing hundreds of millions of dollars, being invested into the ecosystem? I said, maybe by the mid-20s. But we went from tens of millions in investment to now hundreds of millions. That's right. In 2021. Another interesting thing on the capital front, we went from 0 Series B fundraising, pre-2021, to all of a sudden there's about 13.
Right.
Some of them done, some of them in process. I mean, this is a change, right?
Huge.
And so if you're a smart guy and you're on the sidelines and you see this, you say, okay, something's up, right? Smart people, who are from all over the world, who've done this many, many times before, think there's something worthwhile to do in the Philippines.
Right.
The second thing is on the talent front. I think something very exciting is also happening. Now, just look at the number of companies in the last kind of 12 to 18 months from the Philippines that have gotten into Y Combinator.
That's true.
Right? It's Dash Labs, it's Avion, NextPay, Edit Mode, Mad Eats, right? So prior to this crop, right, you had PayMongo in 2018, so 3 years ago. No. And before that, it was Caliber, right, in 2013. Yeah. Right? So again, you look at what's happening with capital, you look at what's happening with talent, something is happening. And I do think, part of what makes this flywheel turn are the entrepreneurs who do pay it forward, right? First they inspire people, then they start mentoring others, right? They're very generous with their time. Then they start sharing their connections and their networks. And then very often, some people on this call, like Mr. Paulo over there, they start investing in some of these very promising companies, right? And so that builds this flywheel, right? And it creates this momentum. So business is open for entrepreneurs in the Philippines.
Yeah, I think, that's one thing that I've noticed myself, just kind of working within the ecosystem over the last couple of years, is that there's definitely an air of collaboration nowadays. It's more about being collaborative than being competitive. And I always say this, I always say a rising tide lifts all ships. In some cases, I say it's Foxmont, but in general, I just mean that, the ecosystem is the rising tide, of course. I
think we have Silicon Valley to thank for that, right? For that kind of inclusive, generous spirit. Because if you compare Silicon Valley, right, the epicenter of tech, to New York, the epicenter of finance, or to Hollywood, the epicenter of entertainment, in those two other cities, you're discussing a great idea with somebody, somebody says, okay, wait, we have to sign NDAs before we do this, right? That's right. You go into any, Phil's Coffee in San Francisco, or somebody's on the laptop, you ask for help, they'll help you, right? They'll share stuff with you.
That's right. Maybe just as a last question before, I'm actually going to move over to Roland after this, because I think it's a nice transition. Plus Nadiem, I think, might be busy at Parliament, I guess. But in general, what are your thoughts on ecosystem building? Like, what are the important parts? We all talk about the ecosystem. It's just like vague concept, but in concrete terms, what do you think are the important parts to build, a robust ecosystem in the Philippines?
Right. So Endeavor actually did a study some years ago with WEF and with Bain and with EY. It was a global study. We looked at ecosystems around the world, and the questions we asked, the key question was, what are the things that need to exist to make an ecosystem hum, right? To get it buzzing. And there were 8 pillars that emerged. And, the top 3 by far were that the ecosystem needed to provide entrepreneurs with access to markets, i.e. customers. Today, not tomorrow, right? Markets, capital, and talent.
Right.
Right. Now, we did another survey just last year. We interviewed probably about 50 entrepreneurs and investors from the Philippines, or who invest in the Philippines.
Okay.
And asked them, right? So what are the key things that need to exist in the Philippines using this framework? And we did a heat map, right, using red, yellow, and green. So access to capital,
Okay.
we're kind of dark orange, right? We're kind of dark
Okay.
orange.
Even
Access,
today, still dark orange, eh?
well, so we did this last year, right? So this is
Okay.
2021, the year of 13 Series B financing, right? But last year we were kind of deep orange.
Okay.
On the talent side, we were kind of, yellowish orange. So on the talent front, right? And this is both technical and managerial.
Right.
But actually, if you look closer, we were kind of greenish yellow for entry level positions, and we were kind of yellowish orange for mid to senior level talent.
Okay.
And then finally, with access to market, we were kind of yellow, but again, it was a tale of two cities. If it was B2C, it was green.
Gotcha.
But if you were trying to sell to the conglomerates, well, man, long sales cycles, not so innovative usually, and then sometimes downright predatory.
Yes.
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 But I would agree. I think if I did this survey again this year, you'd see these colors improving.
Excellent. Thank you, Manny. Where I think actually everything is green at the moment is actually Indonesia. And I actually, with that, I'd like to take a moment to just introduce Minister Nadiem Makarin, Minister of Education and Technology and Culture and so many other things in Indonesia. Nadiem, Minister Nadiem. I'm going to go back. It's Minister of, where are you here? Minister of Education, Culture, Research, and Technology.
Yeah, they keep adding my portfolio. I don't know what's going on.
I mean, when do you have time to sleep?
I try my best.
I'm sorry, I have to ask, do I refer to you as Minister Nadiem, Minister Makarin?
No, just call me Nadiem. I'm too young for Minister Nadiem.
Okay.
If you don't mind. I'm here as an alumni, as a minister.
Yeah, well, Nadiem, thank you so much for taking the time to come join us today.
Of course, it's my pleasure. I see a lot of friendly, familiar faces around here.
Yeah, so one of the things we mentioned before you popped in was that there was a moment in time when you actually shared the halls of Harvard with a couple of faces here, right?
Yeah, Jesse and Paulo.
Yeah.
What's up, guys?
Can you tell us about, can you tell us about some stories about what went on in
no, they're shaking their head right now, so I better not.
Is that not possible? All right. I mean,
there
are no other Indonesians here, I promise. So it won't get.
No, it was a great time. It was, in fact, Jesse, Jesse Maxwell was one of my key thought partners for Gojek and how to think about entrepreneurship. And he was always full of ideas. So we sparred a lot in HBS. Yeah,
right. Fantastic.
He also kept beating me in tennis there. So,
tennis.
Yes, thank God for him. He taught me a lot of sports.
That's actually interesting.
Yeah, HBS was a great, fun place to get inspired by other people doing entrepreneurship. Honestly, I think that was the greatest benefit for me.
Yeah, and of course, you and Jesse were part of a very famous HBS 2011 class. That basically, graduated and went back to your home countries and made some amazing businesses. And actually, one of the things I wanted to ask you was that moment after you graduated from HBS and you went back to Indonesia and started Gojek. I mean, can you give us a lay of the Indonesian landscape in 2011? I mean, what was it like back then as a founder in Indonesia working on a startup?
Well, it was tough, very tough. I could not work full time in Gojek, so I had to kind of put my own savings into it. We had no external investors whatsoever for the first 3 years. So as soon as I came back, I had to get other jobs to get experience and to earn the money to keep funding Gojek. And so I think that was the hardest part. Plus, graduating from HBS and then, having to field through really difficult questions like, okay, you're a Harvard alumni. Like, why are you starting a business with, which are, motorcycle taxis? It just seems so far off. And I was quoting my mom, by the way, in that quote. So it was like, it was very hard. It seemed so strange. So I was bound to McKinsey.
Okay.
Went to McKinsey for about 3 weeks and then said, I can't do this anymore. And I got, the partners really angry, and I said, I'm sorry, I'll take the hit. Give me the debt. I'm going to go join Rocket Internet. I think a few people here probably also involved with Rocket Internet. And that was my university of startups. Rocket, terrible culture, incredible learning for scaling up. Sorry, if anyone's still in Rocket Internet, I apologize. I'm just telling the truth. Back then, it was pretty brutal. So I did there. I got an okay salary, setting up 0 to 1 startups, which were copycats of like e-commerce, fashion startup. So both Lazada and Zalora, I helped set up. And then after a year, I quit. I joined another payment company to learn about payments. And only after like 3 years of this back and forth and just learning and failing in different fields, finally, North Star, a PE in Indonesia, said, this company Uber is pretty interesting. How would you like to continue Gojek full time and probably do a technology product? And I'm like, yes, that's what I've been trying to do this whole time. Thank you. And then the rest is history. So it takes a huge amount of faith, serendipity, and luck to actually stick to it. I mean, we could have shut down Gojek at any given time during those 3 years, and I just was too stubborn to do so. And now we're here.
Right. Actually, you bring up 2 really interesting points there. One is Rocket Internet as a school of entrepreneurship, let's say, which actually, by the way, Foxmont.
I wouldn't say a school of entrepreneurs. Maybe I'll take back my words. It's a school of scaling.
School of scaling. That's a
school
good
of scaling. Yeah, it's slightly different from entrepreneurship because you don't have any skin in the game. So they made sure of that back in the day. You don't have any skin in the game, which by the way, if they had done that, I think they would have been a behemoth in the world. If they gave everybody like 20%, 30% equity, they would probably be a behemoth, because you have no idea how many of these Rocket alumni have gone on and created the most incredible startups, many of them unicorns. So, it was theirs to lose, which is another really important learning, which I never forgot after that.
Yeah, we actually subscribe to that idea as well at Foxmont. So Foxmont is an early stage, VC firm in the Philippines, and we actually love Rocket Internet, founders or ex-founders, let's say, because they do know how to operate in extremely challenging environments. And I think, would you agree that you learned a little bit about how to kind of build out a business, in those early days in Indonesia as well?
Huge amount. I learned how to handle large budgets. I learned how to blitz recruit and blitz scale. Recruiting, definitely, because they were, those guys were asking us to recruit like 100 people a month, like crazy numbers like that. And just how to manage that recruitment process alone was incredible learning. You also learn about a huge amount about what not to do, who not to recruit, because you inevitably make so many mistakes. All right, you overspend on this. You advertise too quickly before you have a product market fit. You learn to notice what types of recruits are just really good at selling themselves instead of analyzing actually what they previously and whether that amounts to an achievement. Those are all subtle things you can only learn by trial and error, by actually messing up recruitment and then requiring a complete, I want to say an expletive here, but I'm not allowed to. So a complete bad-mannered person. You only know by getting burned by doing those things. You also learn in Rocket. I also learned about what culture not to build, and how toxic leadership can lead to fragmentation of your top team. And my entire philosophy after that in Gojek was the cultural diametric opposite of Rocket Internet, but the cultural and the ownership diametric opposite, but I employed a lot of the skills of moving fast and really not worry about oh, is this going to work or is that going to work, but just try it first and see what happens. So that I definitely learned in Rocket. Yeah.
Right. The other thing that you had mentioned earlier is actually access to capital. And of course, you said was it 2013 where you were able to speak to North Star?
Yeah, about 2014. Yeah.
2013, 2014. How easy was it in 2011, let's see, when you first got back, to access capital as a founder in Indonesia? And how important do you think that is today within the Indonesian ecosystem? Because honestly, from our perspective, I feel like Indonesian startups get funding like every day, and it's like tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. But I do want to get a sense of what it was like in 2011 when you first got back, and when, of course, you got your first break with North Star.
It was tough. North Star was among the generation of pioneers around that. And the day, all of the today unicorns and decacorns were quite small then. So there were just this small group of risky VCs and PEs that were acting like VCs that were the first generation, and North Star was part of that. Wilson Ventures is the first in the pure VC model. And so it took this group of people who really was looking at what was happening in Silicon Valley and really excited about it, and to do this investment. I think Rocket added to that climate of excitement, definitely, because then suddenly, seeds were, $5 million, and that was unheard of, right? You've got something was seeded $2-3 million at that time, was unheard of. So when that happened, then it built momentum. 2014 really was a big inflection point around that time, 2014, 15, 16. That was a big inflection point. I think that a lot of new capital came in, and Indonesia naturally gets the lion's share of this because of our market size. Because, right. and don't forget, it all depends upon which wave, because the wave that happened in 2017 was the B2C wave. When you're talking about B2C wave, that's why a lot of the big checks started coming in, because that was the wave of e-commerce, on-demand services, payments, right? The first wave to come in big. So it was a bit of that fear of missing out of these big B2C models. Once those big B2C models are kind of entrenched, then investors kind of start diversifying and looking for other models. But that's why Indonesia would naturally get the lion's share to that, because those are the ones that scale with users to the biggest extent. So I'm sure Philippines was a good, probably like second in getting that wave. I don't know what it's like now, but I think that Indonesia and Philippines will continue to become very attractive places for investment, especially for VCs, because of the population size. Philippines, especially also because you got, I think you got some strengths. You've got your education sector, which I think has a few advantages over the Indonesian education sector. You have English,
right? And
you have a BPO sector that has begun, serving international clients, which we don't. So there's a lot of talent, I think, in the Philippines that can be put to use in the digital economy. Indonesia, really, we had to really build it from scratch and just find really smart people. And each of the unicorns had to train just really smart kids how to do coding, design, machine learning, and whatnot. But it took time. Yeah.
What would you say, actually, because we think of the Philippines as at an inflection point at this very moment. Like, literally, this is when foreign venture capital is looking at the Philippines. We're finally starting to get the likes of Sequoia, investing into the Philippines, A16Z, Pavilion Capital of Temasek. I mean, and those names I just mentioned, literally the first time they invested was within 3 weeks of today. Right. So there is an inflection point coming to the Philippines, and it's happening at the moment. You mentioned an inflection point in 2017, and prior to that, another generation. what were those factors that led to like just this kind of boom, this rush of investments into, Indonesia?
Well, I think you've got to have some success cases, right? So boom was, I think, big players globally started to move in and eye the region. Right? You've got, rumors of Uber going to come in, Amazon going to step in, Alibaba, Tencent. And when that happened, Southeast Asia got put on the map. And the logic always is to investors, if you lose Indonesia, you lose Southeast Asia. Right. So that's always kind of that's kind of the reason, because of the size of the market for all of these B2C businesses. And that's when it became a FOMO kind of situation that happened. Also, one of the things that was interesting was that in the Indonesian context, none of these startups emerged from existing industry. So almost all of them were pure tech players with very little involvement of conglomerates. And what I've noticed is that Philippines is slightly different, whereas there seems to be a lot of partnerships and JVs, etc. At least that's how I remembered it. Right. There's all these kinds of structures that are really interesting in the Philippines, because I think the conglomerates and the traditional sectors were quicker to jump onto the tech industry, but it also created some complications, because everything you wanted to do in the Philippines required, is this serving the best interest of the partner, etc., and a lot of those things. So Indonesia did not behave that way. Indonesia just went, all the founders kind of went solo. Yes, they'll take money from some, but no exclusives, no kind of JV really that is notable. Later on, yes, but they were on the terms of the unicorns. Of what they wanted, like acceptance of their payments, etc. But really, that was not the deciding factor. So I think that's a very different thing. The structure of existing industry and how they decided to participate in the tech sector matters a lot, I think, in that inflection point. The other part was just seeing the runaway big guys rising so quickly, right? You never, like, we've never seen in Southeast Asia as big of a rise as companies like Tokopedia, like Gojek, like then of course Grab came in, and then the late bloomer, but then overtook everyone, Shopee. So those first few cases, they were so crazy. The level of growth, crazy by any standard, crazy by India standards, crazy by China standards, crazy definitely by Silicon Valley standards. When we came and pitched our growth numbers the first time to Silicon Valley investors, they looked at us like we were kind of like snake oil sellers, right? Until they realized Sequoia is in our cap table, and they're like, oh, okay, these guys are telling the truth. It was really, they couldn't believe the speed of adoption, because no one realized everyone had a smartphone around that time already. Everyone already had a smartphone. So that's why adoption, and these were all mobile apps, right? That became the first generation. So yeah, those are, I think, some of the inflection points. And it was the regulatory climate also helped, Indonesia the Indonesian government, I mean, the worst thing that happened to us is Gojek got shut down for a day. Okay, but after a day, we had 100,000 drivers. Then that decision by the Ministry of Transport to shut us down was overturned by the president within 24 hours. So the regulatory climate in Indonesia was very open to innovation, thanks to our president. And it became in a situation where there was so many jobs that needed to be fulfilled. These e-commerce, anything that encouraged micro entrepreneurship, food delivery, ride hailing, these were the biggest employment new sectors ever, right? That were ever created. The total amount of these, top 5 category unicorns created so many jobs and so many micro businesses that it became politically untenable to try to limit it and restrict it. So that's a very important point. So there was a lot of wiggle room, and everyone got too big too quickly for a vested interest to kind of strike. The taxis business, for example, didn't really stand a chance when the ride hailing numbers were 10x of taxi drivers.
Right.
And the government had to think from a jobs and employment and economic perspective.
So what I'm hearing is, and this is something that we face.
But that situation I heard is quite different in the Philippines. There's more interventions there, at least from our experience when I was in Gojek, on regulation, etc. But anyway, please go ahead.
I think that's actually what my question was going to be, was that, from in the context of the Philippines and how we discuss kind of the relationship between the private sector and the government, we always wonder who starts it. Who starts that innovation? I mean, is it the government being very open first, or is it the private sector? Is it the startups that are basically just pushing the boundaries, right? Because there are a lot of different things within the tech industry that just don't fit within any legal books. And it's very hard for a government to understand that, I think. Now, I think you have probably what is the most unique perspective in the world, as coming from one of the fastest growing startups in the world to now in government. In your perspective, where does it start, right? Does it start from the grassroots startups, the founders themselves, pushing the limits? Or do we have to wait for the government to basically say, hey, it's all open for you, go nuts?
If we were in 1970s California, yes, government. My answer would be government. In today's world, where the tools of production are now completely decentralized, it's almost purely, I think, the entrepreneurs themselves and the founders. The government's role is to, one, get out of the way, two, create regulations and incentives that will two, right? You need an accelerator, which gives them a sandbox, a regulatory sandbox, to let them experiment and fumble and try until they get bigger and bigger. But you also need to set some guardrails so that they don't go AWOL and start, destroying customer value, or, like crazy lending businesses that are confiscating people's assets, right? Like stuff like that. So the government's role is prevent really bad damage happening from overly greedy startups or big tech companies. And the other part, and also protecting data privacy and those kind of, and security. But at the same time, letting the startup world go and experiment. And then when they cross certain lines, to actually stop them from doing so. But, I think you've got on one side, you've got Indonesia, okay, yep, which is extremely open and laissez-faire. And on the other side of the spectrum, you've got China.
Right.
Okay, which was laissez-faire and then went and kind of reasserted control. Now, I can't say what's good or bad, right? I don't really know. But in the beginning, when you're in nascent stage, the less intervention you can give to let these tech startups grow up, I think the better, much better. So yeah, it really has to start there. The role of the traditional private sector and conglomerates, I think, is to really put money into these startups. I think I have seen almost universal struggling of conglomerates and traditional companies trying to play the tech game and going against the pure tech players. And I've never actually seen it work. Please correct me. I've never actually seen a runaway success, unless somehow there's an unfair advantage brought by government or regulation, which doesn't exist really in Indonesia. It's really quite open, pretty dramatic and brutal competition in Indonesia so far, right? So yeah, I think those are the respective roles, I think. And the government can add a huge amount of support in talent. I'll tell you what we're doing right now.
Okay.
We've basically unbundled higher education by saying that all top companies and industries can become a mini university. So all the tech startups can take kids, university students, and put them in there for 6 months for project-based learning, internships, and it will qualify as if they're taking 5 classes of a full semester at university. So we actually paid these companies, including tech companies, global and local, to pay for their full-time mentorship, and we pay the transport fee and the living costs of the students. And we just launched our first batch, and there's 18,000 students now going off to companies, world-class companies, to basically spend a semester of university there instead of this. So we've really just broken and unbundled. So I believe that there's a huge long-term impact governments can have on talent. That is probably going to be the biggest bottleneck. It's not going to be money. It's going to be talent. That's where the growth will start to stagnate. Yeah.
That sounds very innovative. I mean, is that something that you've seen in other markets with other governments, or is this something that basically has come from your ministry? Because it sounds amazing, honestly. I mean, it's teaching entrepreneurship, it's teaching business, it's getting kids out of the classroom and getting their hands dirty. Fantastic.
Yeah, I think we were just very pragmatic about it. We took a very problem-solving, 101 approach to this. We have a huge issue of relevancy of talent. How long will it take to make a university look like industry? And how long will it take to incentivize companies to take 100 kids at a time? And so the second option was faster, and it guaranteed relevancy to the world of industry because you're being taught by industry. So why don't we just make companies into mini universities? That was the logic. And then we ran from there, right? And then because we're going to pull in professors from academia to help mentor. And so they will also be influenced by industry as well. So we just wanted to break that weird, arbitrary barrier of academia and the work industry and redefine what it means. When you have a low baseline, right, it's much easier to take big risks like that. And so we just went all in. I've got nothing to lose. So the president is really gung-ho about it. So yes, I ruffled some feathers in universities because now what I've essentially created is a liberal arts system. That's right. Whereby heads of majors have to, I don't know what you call it in the Philippines, majors. What do you call it? Degree programs?
Okay, yeah, degree programs, right.
Yeah. So degree programs have to squeeze within 5 semesters instead of 8 semesters, their mandatory courses. So because I gave freedom to universities to take 3 semesters outside of their major and 2 semesters off campus. We don't care if you're teaching for a semester, going to an internship, or even doing a research project with a research team. It's fine. As long as you get out of campus, then you give the right of the student to get out of campus, we're happy. So we're taking 3 out of 8 semesters to be outside of your major. So it's a backdoor way of creating a liberal arts system while co-opting the industry and research world.
Right. Fantastic. Nadiem, I just wanted to get, I'll just take your time for a couple more minutes. By the way.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Busy. But I did want to just get a sense of entrepreneurship in Indonesia. I mean, was that a thing in 2011? Because today, of course, it looks like, Indonesia just churns out, entrepreneurs left and right, startup founders, coming from every day we read about it here in the Philippines. But is entrepreneurship, natural and inherent to Indonesia?
Yes, I would say.
Okay.
There simply aren't enough, I find it a little bit interesting that some people assume that, why there is unemployment is because the education system does not have enough relevant skills and therefore industry is not hiring them. But no one ever actually does the math. When you calculate like how many jobs there are versus how many university graduates there are, it very quickly comes to the conclusion that there simply aren't as many jobs as there are graduates, right? Which is why in the Philippines and Indonesia, it's very common to find university graduates earning the same amount of money as a high school graduate, right? By doing, entry-level retail jobs or becoming a cashier, right? And so on. So it's very important that actually Indonesia by necessity has become an entrepreneurial country. Everyone's got a side business. Everyone's got a side hustle. I'm assuming the Philippines is exactly the same, right? It's a place where you trade, you do something, you work for someone, you freelance, you find a way to make ends meet at the end of the day. And that culture, that kind of I gotta do this on my own, otherwise no one's gonna help me, is something that Indonesia has a lot of. Even though we may not have the best educational institutions, that spirit of entrepreneurship is very strong in our DNA. And you see it in the villages and a variety of places. Everyone's trying to sell something, create something, grow something, make something. And the vivacity of our e-commerce sector is proof of that. How many people are making things, selling things? Our food industry is exploding. So yes, entrepreneurship all the way to micro entrepreneurship is definitely part of our DNA.
Okay, interesting. Maybe just as a final question, Nadiem, I did want to ask about, the various parts of the ecosystem that you think are necessary to create a robust startup ecosystem, right? We always say at Foxmont that the ecosystem starts with the founders. But in your opinion, from what you've seen in Indonesia, what other roles, what other places have to be filled to create a whole and complete ecosystem?
Well, founders definitely important, but founders can't do anything without talent. So I think the most important ecosystem is the talent ecosystem, out of all ecosystems. So the slower traditional companies that pay well have technology teams, the harder will be the talent development. So now all big companies, even traditional companies, have technology teams, because they're trying to do all these kind of things to optimize their operations. So it's very, the countries that don't start doing that, then your talent pool of technology talent, of specific to digital skills talent, are not growing in technology companies and outside of technology companies, then you've got a real problem real fast, right? Which is already happening. Indonesia's hit that limit already. If you look, how you can tell if they've already hit the talent limit is look at the biggest technology companies and how many foreigners are they employing at managerial positions, right? That's how you can see that they've run out. Foreigners are way more expensive. So you only hire them when you absolutely don't have those talents in local talent. So that's really, I think, the most fragile part of the ecosystem. Money, capital, I don't think that's an issue in today's world. There's just so much liquidity in the world. Everyone's gunning for tech. Southeast Asia is now, I would say, the hottest region for tech since China kind of slowed down. India's tricky and complicated because of its kind of GDP per capita. So Southeast Asia is naturally, and Latin America, I would say, but more Southeast Asia is naturally going to gravitate and get money into it. So I don't think that part of the equation. I think the government role is going to be extremely important. What is the mindset of the government leaders and the ministers and the regulators, how they perceive how important innovation and technology is, and what they are willing to tolerate in terms of what they don't know. People are scared of what they don't know, right? So when they don't know something, their tendency is to regulate it. Their tendency is to kind of put guardrails because someone told them, like, if you don't do this, the world will go to hell, basically, right? Or your entire system will fall apart. And that never really happens. That never really happens. We've never yet seen something fall apart, to that extent. Disruption happens, but they usually create more jobs so far. That won't always happen, but it's much more complicated what happens with technological disruption. So I think that mindset of government is extremely important. A government that believes that their best bet is in something else, let's say like natural resources or something, it's going to be really hard for the innovators and the technology sector to thrive. But if the government believes, if the president or the prime minister really believes in the power of technology and of the digital economy, that's a huge factor in terms of the potential for growth.
Got it. Thanks, Nadiem. Listen, Nadiem, thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. And I think just in general, all 91 participants, HBS grads, and everybody on the panel has really appreciated your insights coming from both government and from Gojek. And we really do, thank you for taking the time to be with us this afternoon.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
Yeah, I'm about to call on 3 startups to the panel here. And I would say that amongst them are probably the next Gojek and Tokopedia. I would invite you to stick around if you have the time just to learn more. Or if not, it's okay.
Unfortunately, I cannot. The president has just requested for me to go see him. So I have to leave in about 5 minutes. Yeah.
There's no better excuse, Nadiem. Excuse I've ever heard.
That one's actually real though. This time I didn't have to make an excuse.
I believe it. I believe it. But then thank you, Nadiem. I really appreciate it. Hope we can share some more insights sometime in the near future. Hope we can have you come visit us here too.
Yeah, I'm long overdue for a Manila visit. I'm a huge fan of the Philippines and Manila. I feel like they're Jakarta's twin city. So yeah, Jesse can tell you any chance I get, I'll be over there, but it's tricky right now. But hopefully when this dies down in the pandemic, I will definitely try to make it out there.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Nadiem. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. So we'll take a moment then to call Roland and Aldrich and Cons onto the stage. I think we've just learned a lot.
Awesome.
Incredible insights from a guy that really just has done it all. And I think Jesse, can you just remind us how old is Nadiem?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Nadiem is actually younger than me. He's 36, 37. God,
I don't know about you guys, but I feel like I have failed at something in life. 36 years old, he's already the Minister of Education, founder of one of the largest unicorns in the world. So in any case, Roland, hi.
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
Oh.
Yeah, thank you for joining us today. I think, of course, we're all very excited to learn about Kumu itself. Of course, you three do represent amongst the fastest growing startups in the country. And you specifically, Roland, you have such an interesting story, given the fact that you arrived here on the shores of the Philippines a short 3 years ago in 2018 with an idea. And that idea has turned into a massive social media app, a live streaming app that not only focuses on the Philippines, but the Philippine diaspora. So I think that's so interesting to learn about today. However, I wanted to start with a larger picture.
Yeah.
There's a big word behind us. It's Sinigang Valley.
Yes.
And it's nobody has questioned it so far, which is funny. What I do want to do is kind of get a deep dive and understand Sinigang Valley itself. I mean, can you tell everybody where the name came from? How did it all come together?
Yeah, no, I think a lot of it was a half joke from my co-founder Rexy, who I started Kumu with, and we all moved here in the Rockwell area, and we were just exercising going down Palma, and noticed that it was the most underutilized street in Poblacion, and just thought that it would be a great place. Just from my experience being so from Los Angeles and Santa Monica area, that whole area was called Silicon Beach. And then prior to my time there, I had helped start a startup in Silicon Valley and experienced an exit. And just, with the mentorship of folks like Manny from Endeavor and this whole concept of network effects, I remembered that first time when we did do that exit. My first 2 advisors, Luke and Kenny, they were co-founders of PayPal. And I remember that amazing vitality at that time where, Reed founded LinkedIn. There was Chad and some other guys who founded YouTube. I remember that when they started this fund called Founders Fund, they had met this guy, Mark, ended up being Facebook, right? And there was a guy who was really into blogs, right? And that blog was TechCrunch, right? And that magic of seeing all of them together was a huge inspiration. That when I moved here and I saw this street, I thought that how cool would it be, based off of especially the portfolio that Foxmont has put together, for all of us to really come together as an ecosystem to collaborate and just really sharpen each other and really leverage each other's strengths for the uplifting of the tech ecosystem here in the Philippines. And so while doing that, I think we met Jenny at her speakeasy. I don't know if that's, it was allowed, right? The speakeasy.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I'm like, oh no, I'm not in a speakeasy.
The best part about it is nobody will know where it is because it's a speakeasy. So you can talk.
Yeah. And I remember we were talking about this idea in Palma and how we could all just converge in Poblacion. And Rexy, we were just joking, and he just said he called it Sinigang Valley, and it just stuck. It just sounded so cool, and we just knew, Rexy always coins like the best terms and things like that. And so when he said Sinigang Valley, it just made so much sense, especially when you think about the ingredients, the sourness, and just putting together that dish, and the fact that food is such an important part of Filipino culture. I don't know, it just kind of stuck, and really happy to see that now we're having talks at HBS alumni things about it. So yeah.
Oh, I mean, it really did start with a conversation with us. If you think about it, between us and yourselves at Wildflower and Rockwell. I mean, that's how it all began. Yeah. And now, I mean, tell us, how many buildings do you guys plan on having out in Sinigang Valley at this point?
I think the first one is because the offices are being the whole concept of work has been challenged, and so most of our people do work from home. So we were looking at a building that's actually a dormitory, so the people could actually work from home, but at the same time committing to a co-working space, so that if they want to have an office feeling, they could actually walk over to an office space and then go back and forth. And in the dormitory, we have like a rooftop deck, a gym, a video game room, and those types of things. And we named it the Tarsier Conservation Society. I think a lot of people actually think there's tarsiers inside. Sorry, there's no tarsiers inside.
Except for Rexy.
Yeah, it's big letters. It just says Tarsier Conservation Society. And to answer your question, because the company keeps on growing, we initially had committed to 2 buildings, then it became 3, 4, 5. I think now it's 6 different spaces. So right when you enter Palma Street from Rockwell Drive, all the way down to the very end, I think every 40 or 50 meters, you'll run into it. And it's very similar to my experience, working with Snapchat as well, is how they were able to really transform Venice, not so much in like a high rise, but just really saturating a neighborhood and really, being a part of that particular community. So it's not just our office space, but talking to folks like Square One about their hospitality concepts, talking to folks like, Pineapple Lab and Conduit about the cultural spaces, talking to folks like NextPay and, all these other startups and investment funds like Open Space Ventures and you all, the Gentry Fund, enablers and community leaders like Endeavor, like Kubo and Idea Space and those types of things. So just really making it a community space all across the sector.
Yeah. I mean, it's that's one thing I really love about Kumu itself and the management team that you put together, which, by the way, I'm so sorry, I should have mentioned, of course, you have a manager that used to be part of Nadiem's team, right? That used to work at Gojek, basically right beside Nadiem the whole time. I should have mentioned that.
Yeah, Crystal, our chief product officer, she's more of a partner than just a person of the team. She had joined, was a part of Gojek at the Series B, and then really helping it grow to the decacorn that it is. And being there, overseeing growth and business intelligence, she's been a transformational addition to the Kumu family.
Right.
We're super grateful for her.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I just love the air of collaboration that you guys have, and I think you really do bring that to Sinigang Valley itself, and of course all the future locators, which I would say includes Cons and Aldrich. And
Absolutely.
they're,
I mean, I don't know if you all
rapidly
know,
growing.
but yeah, I mean, I don't know if you all know, but like we're fully integrated. Like with Locad, they're our e-commerce partner. You know, all the time. You know, I'm talking to Paulo about the future of e-commerce. You know, it's super cool because, you know, Paulo's experience at BCG. There's this defining report that BCG, oh, and I see Anthony there too,
Anthony's here.
talking about e-commerce being a $4 trillion emerging market opportunity, specifically around payments and logistics. But there was something about digital influence that really stuck out for us as part of that thesis. And so when thinking through about who are those right partners, you know, whether it's a Send It or a Gcash on the payment side, whether it's a Locad on the logistics side, I always love having these conversations with Paulo about, you know, what the future of e-commerce would look like here in the Philippines.
Right, right. You know, I did want to just talk, you know, focus just for a second on Kumu itself and basically the way that it's grown so explosively since 2018, right? You know, one of the stories I always say is that Foxmont itself can actually draw a straight line and a straight path between the day that we invested with you in 2018, November 2018, at the roof of the Fairmont Hotel, to today, where you guys employ what, 400 people, have, as you just said, 6 buildings in Sinigang Valley, and bring millions of dollars per month in revenue directly to the Philippine GDP. I mean, if there is one pure example of how much the Philippine startup ecosystem can contribute to the GDP, I think it really is Kumu at this point. But I did want to ask you, besides the amazing technology and commitment to community that your own business has, what would you say are the outside factors that helped Kumu get on this amazing path? And how do we get others to follow?
Yeah, I think that's, you know, that's one of the key things that Nadiem was talking about, right? From an ecosystem perspective, is he was talking about smartphones. And for us, when you're timing the market, right? So Dado Banata is our first advisor, and timing is so critical, in addition to having the right team, having the right operating plan, you know, and having that technological advantage and timing. And, you know, when you have billions of dollars being spent on internet infrastructure, you know, we jumped, you know, according, it was an UCLA report, right? 50 nations this past year, where, you know, the internet, you know, for folks like Converge ICT, Globe, PLDT, a lot of people are actually pessimistic about it. And that was actually one of our execution operational advantages, is we were operating in an environment where people were just pessimistic about the Philippine internet, while at the same time, we were realizing that all we needed was a particular megabyte download speed to execute a live streaming business at that particular time. So one is billions of dollars in internet infrastructure.
Right.
When you talk about TAM, you have 100 million people averaging Gen Z millennial age. So now you have a young market of 100 million people.
Yeah.
And then thirdly is, Nadiem was just mentioning it, you have companies like, sorry, this is an iPhone, but Vivo, Oppo, Xiaomi, Huawei, literally pushing out iPhone 7s for less than $100, 3 GB RAM, 4G LTE phones at less than $100. And when you combine all those features, you come up with a mobile first strategy to execute in this particular TAM.
Right.
That has been great for everyone who wants to launch a tech startup here.
But I think that's, you know, maybe as a final question before I move on to Cons and Aldrich,
Yeah.
that's one of the things it's interesting, is because, of course, we have extremely smart people watching this panel today that all have thought that, you know, there has to be a right time, and it never was before, right? We were always thinking the internet's too expensive, it's too crappy, if phones are too expensive, the masses will never, you know, get to fully connected to the internet. But what I'm hearing from you, am I right? What I'm hearing from you is that those days are over. I mean, now it's ripe to access that TAM. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when you look at those 3 factors, and then you look at what BCG was talking about in e-commerce with regards to that focus on payments, logistics, and digital influence, and you know, it's. I'm gonna have to say something too, because Manny was talking about this in Endeavor. We had noticed that traditionally, right, Indonesia and Brazil were always kind of getting, in their respective markets, they were always, you know, in the tech ecosystem, the darlings of those particular regions, but not so much Mexico and the Philippines. Why? And something that Linda Rottenberg said, the CEO of Endeavor, was that because the big fish eat the little fish in Mexico and the Philippines. And sorry, I'm just gonna have to say that, right? But what's happening though is there's been a shift and an open-heartedness from the key business units here in this particular country and in other market and in Mexico, where you're actually seeing a shift. And I think when you're starting to see the cap tables, you know, when we were literally running out of money and Liza Golkongwei first invested in Kumu and her brother Lance and how great they were and how open-minded they were to do that. And then right after that, ABS-CBN, and then right after that, the Ayala family through Kickstart Ventures, and then right after that, the C family of SM through Gentry Fund.
Yeah,
you know, we were the first startup to really have that many business families all on the same page, investing in us and really having that open heart to let us execute and give us enough control to be able to execute within that particular context. While traditionally, if you say even 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when I am advising a lot of startups and I look at their cap table, I go, whoa, you got $1 million and they already have over half of your company. It makes it untenable to be able to really invest in and grow that startup. And now you see very similar dynamics when you look at Bella from Edamama, you know, Locad, everyone, you're starting to see multiple families and businesses investing in that startup. And I just want to call that out, that this is something that just happened within the last 2 or 3 years. And, you know, it's something that we're all grateful for. And I think it's really helped the ecosystem a lot.
Yeah, I always say that actually, I think Kumu's cap table and the way that Kumu raised is basically the best example of how the big families can play nice.
Yeah.
And all work together to help build, you know, great businesses. So thanks, Roland. Really appreciate your insights there. You know, I'll go over to Locad and Cons for a second. Of course, Cons is another example of where big families were, you know, happy to play nice as well. Cons, I think you have such an interesting history. You know, we know from recent news that Locad itself has closed a round of investments with Sequoia, amongst others. And that does represent one of the first investments of Sequoia in the Philippines ever. So your journey is quite interesting to me, right? You were with Zalora, if I'm right, then you were with Entrego and now Locad. I mean, you could have started Locad from anywhere, in my opinion. However, you chose the Philippines. While I'm sure there's other personal factors involved, what business factors would you say allowed you to successfully launch Locad from the Philippines?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, it's so great to be here on the panel with so many people who played a key role for me to make Philippines my second home, and then or my first home by now, and to then help us start Locad with, of course, the guys at Kumu being one of our big clients now, with you guys at Foxmont coming in together with Sequoia, with also my family, and a bunch of others, and of course with Paulo, who's the originally responsible person for me relocating to the Philippines 9 years ago, and making PH my adopted home country. So ultimately, when we looked at starting Locad, of course, I mean, being at home in Manila and having been part of the ecosystem development with Zalora then Entrego, and seeing the industry had a factor in making us choose Philippines as both our first market to launch and our home base and HQ. But again, aside from the personal affiliation to the country, what we saw at the time is that we felt Philippines finally now got to that right place, right time, where a couple of shifts are happening that one we felt created a strong need for Locad, and that at the same time allowed us to gain that initial traction and validation that you need to essentially turn the idea into a company. And we started Locad as a baby of the pandemic in April, May last year, 2020. And that was a good time where you had that shift in e-commerce adoption. E-commerce now really getting serious. It had of course come a long way already. I mean, when I first came to Philippines, 2013, Zalora and Lazada had just moved out of being in the same warehouse, and then when they combined, did a couple of thousand a day. It was like a big day for Philippine e-commerce, right? So it was tiny at the time. But when I came, ignorance is bliss. I saw 100 million people and didn't quite realize how big the gap at the time to the actual addressable market was. But we saw 100 million people, figured they would buy fashion online, right? So I guess there was sort of the ignorance of the newcomer. But things had changed, right? So by 2020, we saw massive consumer adoption in, of course, partially because of the pandemic. We saw people shopping now for new categories, including essentials, which means you need to get it faster and more reliably because you're actually waiting for it. At the same time, perhaps even more importantly, we saw this massive change on the supply side, right? Philippines had always been a country similar to what Nadiem mentioned about Indonesia earlier, where everybody has a side hustle. Everybody has a lot of businesses that they're doubling into. And with the pandemic and with people either being out of work or shortened work hours or generally work from home, it felt like everybody started their own online business. Everybody started selling something online, right? And as part of that, a lot of kind of new age online retailers, merchants, and also direct to consumer brands were created. And on the more established enterprise side, we saw now really the digital transformation of the traditional retailers and brands accelerating, and by mid 2020 everybody was running a direct to consumer brand or retailer. Like if you're a brand, you had a direct to consumer business, right? And that I guess created a bit the perfect storm where then to address the scale that many were facing and growing fast in the e-commerce business, and at the same time rising customer expectations, where the need came up for a platform that can essentially support the backend infrastructure that allows you to scale your e-commerce business with warehousing, with pick and pack, with shipping. And yeah, in the context, we decided to launch Locad in the Philippines first and foremost. I think in the end is a good launch pad for building a business with, because it's big enough to gain a certain scale and validation. It's a good proxy in the end of the consumer population to other big markets like Indonesia, Vietnam, to some extent Thailand. But at the same time, it's not big enough for many businesses, and of course there are clearly exceptions. I mean, you guys at Kumu being one. There are certain businesses that can just become so big and in the diaspora that it's a different story. But for many, like Locad Philippines alone is probably in the long term not. So it also forces you to kind of look abroad. So you have a big enough to gain traction and to get learnings, but not comfortable enough to sort of just stay there forever. I think that's at least what was the case in Locad's case. And one of our angel investors actually, who's from China and has seen the massive evolution there, was saying, I'm actually not in Indonesia because it will force you to look out a bit earlier than others. Now, it's of course debatable, but I think it's, I mean, you gotta make use of the advantages you have rather than lamenting the disadvantages, right?
Yeah, that's true. Cons, I gotta ask, you know, if you had started this business 2 or 3 years ago, and gone fundraising, do you think that you would have gotten the sort of, you know, attraction that you found today in the fundraising market? Or is this present time represent a very unique time in Philippine history?
Yeah, it's clearly now a lot easier than it used to be, right? I guess, I mean, from a regional investor's perspective, they have seen it work in Indonesia, and many people made a lot of money there. So the question is, what's the next Indonesia? At the same time, Indonesia also feels like it's so competitive now, and at the same time, a lot of the big companies have been created. Of course, it continues, but it's gotten competitive to a point, and maybe a bit saturated to a point where people are looking at the next opportunities. And I think clearly Philippines and Vietnam sort of together are in a journey where local ecosystems are developing and where things are happening quite quickly. And yeah, 4 years ago after Zalora, when we created a first company, back in the day, we built it as part of a joint venture, partially because of the inherent advantages in the starting point we had, but also we felt that at that time maybe we didn't see the time ripe for raising a lot of money and building a standalone business in PH, and that clearly has changed, which is super important for the ecosystem. Yeah,
very true. Thanks, Cons, for your unique perspective. I think it's just so exciting that of course you do represent, you know, this fast growing industry, you know, this great interest, outside investor interest in the Philippines. And of course, coming from Germany, moving to the Philippines and starting this fast-growing business is such an interesting story. So thank you for sharing that with us. I know we're running a little bit out of time, so I will just ask Aldrich the hardest questions of the hour. No, I'm just kidding. Aldrich, thank you for joining us and thank you for waiting so long to be able to speak a little bit. I do want to ask about your own journey, right? As NextPay, you do represent also uniquely a couple of things. One, as Manny had mentioned, one of the few Filipino companies that got into Y Combinator and therefore received an investment from Y Combinator, a very prestigious accelerator out of California. You also represent the first investment or one of the first investments from Golden Gate Ventures.
Yep.
I mean,
I think I believe we're the second one. Yeah.
Okay, so I wasn't wrong
cool.
by saying one of the
yes,
you
exactly.
were the second. And I think that you're in such an interesting industry because fintech, of course, everybody talks about fintech in the Philippines today. Why was now really the right moment for you to start NextPay? Why not earlier, or why not wait a little bit longer? I mean, why was now the moment for you?
That's a great question, actually. So I guess I first of all, thank you everybody for having me as well. It's just such an honor to be on the panel here. But so diving right into it, it was interesting because we launched right at the very start of the pandemic. And so we all know Philippines is very much a cash-based economy, and the overall banking infrastructure is still quite dated by and large. I mean, there's technologies popping up everywhere, that's for sure, but yeah, I think it's still a very disjointed space, and these were problems that people were just kind of tolerating. And everything was moving up kind of behind the scenes. Banks are starting to digitize more and more, and some of them have APIs and all that. But the pandemic just kind of really exposed it and put such a strong emphasis on all of the holes and the weaknesses of our current landscape, right? And so we were actually working on something, our North Star, which is financial wellness for every Filipino. And we were, I guess it just so happened that we were piloting something similar to that, and we were working on a disbursement solution for salaries. But then when the pandemic hit, that's when we realized, okay, people couldn't even get paid in the first place. And it just showed how much more, MSMEs, the smaller businesses in the Philippines were severely underserved. And the fact that, there's such a huge population, and how MSMEs are like the backbone of pretty much every economy. It just really showed how bad it was. That they're relying on all the manual methods, and it just needed help. So that's when we decided to say, okay, there's something here. This is an area that's really ripe for innovation and an opportunity. And we could also, myself being a balikbayan, as we mentioned before, and my co-founder Don as well, we worked in US and Canada, right? It was an opportunity for us to bring kind of what we've learned over there and kind of try and apply it here, and kind of get creative with what is available. And I think even outside of fintech, as we're just discussing, there's so much tech happening all around us, and I guess all these windows are just opening up, and it's just starting to make sense how everything can now get a lot more integrated seamlessly.
Yeah, I agree. And it just, again, I think there's just this air of collaboration nowadays. I mean, I know that
exactly
work a little bit with other panelists here as well. And I feel like that just kind of super boosts your own growth. I do feel like many Filipino startups in the past have actually received international funding, but then quite quickly moved on to international growth, right? International expansion. So, receive the funding here, go straight to Indonesia. Receive the funding here, go straight to Singapore. Do you specifically as NextPay feel that same need to do that today? Or are your international investors happy with your TAM, basically happy with you servicing the Filipino? Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think for NextPay specifically, we're very happy with addressing the Philippine market, just because there's quite a lot already. We there's like around an 80 million potential of people unbanked, and 90% of the Philippines is all SMEs, right? So there's just so much opportunity there in and of itself, that we don't exactly need to jump right away to international expansion. And I think, however, we did build our tech in a way that we could, if if it feels right. Now, as for the investors, I think it's also kind of, yeah, I guess I will share a part of our YC journey, our Y Combinator journey, is that one thing that we noticed, and in the recent batches, right, again, because of the pandemic, YC kind of went fully remote. So now they're opening up their doors to even more, hundreds and hundreds more startups all over the world. And a lot of these startups you're seeing are coming from emerging markets, or developing countries, a lot in Africa, in India, of course, Indonesia and Philippines. So there's, like everyone was saying, there's a huge shift in the whole mindset and a huge shift in focus, and everyone's kind of realizing, like, oh man, there's actually so much more opportunity to do really meaningful things, and obviously to eventually make a ton of money in all these emerging markets. So I think those investors, and especially the ones that we have been very happy to bring on, really understand this, and they really understand the potential and the opportunity that is present in addressing even just the MSME market and even the unbanked markets of developing countries.
Yeah, super unique solutions, and I think finally, again, these outside investors, finally, you guys represent what is basically an understanding that the Philippine market can really be enough of a TAM. So thanks for your insights there, Aldrich. I know we're running a little bit late, so I'm actually just gonna finish off here, but I did want to invite everybody to in the audience to, of course, check out Kumu. So download Kumu, please, on your iPhones, and please start live streaming. I think, Roland, you live stream every Thursday night, 8:30 p.m., right? Is it singing that you do, or is it what do you?
I think he dances.
I'm a rapper, actually.
Okay, so everybody wants one. Sorry?
I rap.
Oh, I'm in for that.
Just sometimes.
That's awesome.
Sometimes.
So please download Kumu in your iPhones, and then Aldrich, of course, services a lot of
MSMEs, yeah.
MSME. I couldn't get that word out. Please visit nextpay.world for that as well. If you want NextPay to help your business. Cons, of course, if you have logistics needs, go locad.com, right, Cons? Is that right?
That's right. Yes, go locad.com or just connect on LinkedIn. Super happy to talk to anyone selling stuff online and offline and needing some logistics support. And thanks for having me.
Yeah,
today.
Thanks everybody. Last but not least, before we wrap up, I did want to say that, of course, as Foxmont, we at Foxmont, we're very excited to be part of this ecosystem. We're very happy to have Roland and Cons and Aldrich as part of our portfolio. If any of you do want to learn a little bit more about Foxmont itself, we do have something called Foxmont Day. So please put it in your calendars. Wow. Yes, I think it's a national holiday already, actually. But just in case it's not, please earmark it for anybody that wants to learn more and meet the team. Foxmont is not just myself. It's a great team that includes Jesse and our third partner, Mark. We've got many others as well. September 9 at 4:00, we'll be kind of presenting ourselves, and maybe doing some rapping as well. So maybe Roland will do a little cameo there. You can actually visit bit.ly, so bit.ly/Foxmont Day to register, and we'll just send over a link. And you can watch Jesse and myself rap battle during that. So please come and visit. Or come and visit our website, foxmontcapital.com as well, if you want to learn more.